I was diagnosed with cancer. But after I died, I learned it was all a plot by my father and stepmother. They just wanted me to give my corneas to my stepsister. Knowing everything, I was filled with rage. Suddenly, I felt a strong pull, and when I woke up again, I had become my stepsister. On the day I was diagnosed with cancer, I told my dad, hoping for some comforting words from him. He was silent for a long while, then tentatively asked, "Since that's the case, can you donate your corneas to Jessie before the cancer spreads?" Jessie was his stepdaughter, my stepsister. When I heard that, I doubted my ears were working right. I had always known I was the odd one out. But I never thought my dad would say something like this in such a situation. At that moment, any bit of admiration I had for him vanished completely. I laughed, with tears streaming down my face, grabbed his collar, and cursed, "Am I really your biological daughter? Is this seriously your reaction to my illness? Can you think about me for once? Haven't I been obedient enough?" Growing up, I had given up everything Jessie wanted. I let her have the class leader position, the top rank in our grade, even a man. And now they wanted my eyes too. My dad slapped me hard, knocking me to the ground. He always thought highly of himself, but in front of me, his pride overflowed. I stared dumbly at his ferocious face. In a blur, I remembered how he looked when he took me out of the village. Back then, he was in a suit, handsome and gentle. I held his big, warm hand, clutching the doll he bought me, feeling so proud. I thought, no one would call me a bastard child anymore. And I wouldn't be beaten by my aunt anymore. Who knew he just brought me back to be a plaything for his wife, Rachel, who couldn't have kids. Rachel treated me like an animal, playing with me when she was happy, beating me when she wasn't. She only wanted me to complete the family image. But later, she got pregnant, and I wasn't even treated as well as their housekeeper. Even so, I always thought my dad loved me. I thought he wanted to give me a better life, but just couldn't. But now I understood. He was just an insecure, incompetent man, unworthy of being a father. I stood up, walked to the door without saying a word. But Rachel was standing there, coldly saying, "It's just corneas. Do you have to make such a fuss? You're going to die anyway. I'll pay for everything you need before you die. Besides, you've lived off me for almost 20 years, have a heart, will you?" She said this as if it was the most normal thing. Her bloated face, full of makeup, still looked ugly and mean. I sneered, gave her the finger, and dragged my suitcase out of that mansion. In my final days, even if I die on the streets, I won't go back or need their money. Luckily, I've always been frugal and saved some money from part-time jobs. Since high school I rented a small room in the heart of the city. Life was peaceful, and my body didn't feel too bad. But out of nowhere, the rope always breaks at its thinnest point. Within 2 weeks, on my way back from the hospital with my meds, I encountered a thug. He stabbed me straight in the heart. I collapsed in a pool of blood, unable to move. In my final moments, I wondered why he killed me without even robbing me. When I woke up again, I was a wandering spirit in the hospital. Not far away, there was a familiar voice. I floated over and saw it was Jessie and Rachel. This was a VIP ward, and they were the only ones inside. Jessie had her eyes bandaged and was clutching Rachel's sleeve, nervously asking, "Mom, is everything really okay?" Her voice was filled with a mix of fear and excitement I had never heard before. Rachel comforted her, patting her hand, "There's no surveillance there, and the doctors won't say anything, don't worry." Hearing this, I was confused. What did she mean? I moved closer and heard Jessie continue, "The police won't find out I wasn't sick, right? Is the killer trustworthy?" Hearing this, I would be an idiot not to understand. I opened my eyes wide, realizing that Rachel had such guts. She bribed the doctor to fake my diagnosis and hired a killer. On top of that, she seemed quite proud of herself. A misdiagnosis is perfectly normal. She was wearing a metal jacket and we got an intern to take her scan. As for the killer, he just wanted to leave some money for his family. I paid him in cash, it's all foolproof. "Jessie, don't worry about it. Just rest. By the time you wake up, you'll be able to see again." At that moment, my mind went blank. But Jesse continued, "What about Dad? He's deep in gambling debt. He either shuts his mouth and I'll pay his debts, or he can sort it out on his own and leave with nothing. What do you think he'll choose?" Hearing this, Jesse relaxed and grabbed Rachel's hand. "Mom, you're the best." Rachel also patted Jesse's head. "All right, get some rest. Mom will handle everything for you. Good night." She then leaned in and kissed Jesse's forehead. Her gentle look was a stark contrast to how she treated me. At that moment, seeing their family scene, I felt a boundless rage and resentment inside me. I wished I could tear them apart, devour their flesh, to quench my anger. But I couldn't touch them. I was already dead. Why? No one in this world has my back, no one cares about me, no one knows me. Do I have to just die like this? I hate this. Tears fell to the floor, turning from clear to red. So even spirits can cry, huh? At the same time, the lights started flickering, faster and faster, until the fuse blew. Rachel sensed something was wrong and looked in my direction but saw nothing. She didn't see me staring at her furiously. In the next moment, Jessie started screaming, "Mom, my eyes hurt. Mom." Her voice caught Rachel's attention, and she pressed the nurse's call button frantically. But the button was broken too. She could only comfort Jessie, "Mommy will be right back. Hold on, I'll get the doctor." And then, she waddled out the room. Jessie, frightened and blind, fell off the bed and cried hysterically. Without being able to see, she felt even more insecure. I walked slowly to her side, watching her terrified face. My grudge grew heavier, and I had only one thought: they must pay for their blood debt. Then, I grabbed her neck hard. I couldn't believe it. I actually grabbed Rachel, whom I couldn't even touch before. Before I had time to be happy, a strong suction force hit me. When I woke up again, I was in complete darkness. The difference was, my hands felt warm. The next moment, someone was holding me. Rachel's voice sounded anxious next to my ear. "Baby, why did you fall on the ground? Are you okay? Don't scare Mommy. Doctor. Doctor, can you help here? We didn't pay the medical bills for nothing, did we?" Her scolding kept ringing in my ears, gradually bringing me back to my senses. I secretly pinched my thigh. It hurt a lot. I started laughing uncontrollably, holding my head. Rachel's voice sounded more panicked. "Daughter, are you okay?" I held her hand back. Then, I heard myself say in Jessie's voice, "Mom, I'm fine." A month later, I could finally see again. Looking at the skinny, pale-skinned Jessie in the mirror, I touched my face. At the same time, Jessie's reflection also touched her face. The feeling was eerie. I pulled the corners of my mouth, my eyes hiding a sneer. "Baby, how are you? Can you see now?" Rachel asked, worried. She was wearing a bright red dress, looking squeezed in, with her flesh bulging at the waist and a chunky gold necklace around her neck. I blinked my uncomfortable eyes and nodded. This month, I had been trying to act like Jessie, but some small details were still difficult to manage, so I spoke less. Now that I could see, I needed to practice more in the bathroom. But things like possession, hardly anyone would believe that, right? Luckily, the doctor started talking to Rachel about my condition. He said I was recovering well, and the more I listened, the more annoyed I felt. The resentment in my heart made my whole body ache. I had switched to Jessie's body, but everything seemed blurry, as if the world was covered in a veil. Was this the good situation worth killing me for? It felt horrible. The worst part was, during this month of blindness, I had to endure Rachel's meticulous care. The smell of her makeup almost suffocated me. God knows how much I wanted to grab the fruit knife from the nearby table and stab it into her heart, letting her feel the pain I endured at my death. Also, I always felt that Jessie was still in the body sometimes. I could even hear her crying and asking to be let out. But as time passed, her appearances became less frequent. I believed she would disappear completely soon. I really wanted to see Rachel's expression when she found out everything. I curled my lips, a hint of brutality escaping uncontrollably. Jesse, do you want anything to eat? Daddy will go get it for you. A large hand suddenly covered mine, its heat making me frown and turn my head. It was my good dad. Oh no, not Dad, it was Leo. He wasn't fit to be called my father. At this moment, his face full of concern made him look like a caring dad. Quite different from the cold attitude he had towards me. He even seemed a bit ingratiating. I pulled my hand back and smiled. Forget it, Mom will get it for me, anyway you don't have any money, Dad. Hearing my words, he froze for a moment. The embarrassment and anger flashed across his face. If it were me who said this, he would probably have hit me, but now, he didn't dare to retort and instead scratched his head and smiled. Your mom is capable. Look how lucky Daddy is to have married your mom. I smirked, not hiding my disdain at all. Anyway, Jesse usually looked down on him too. Seeing this, he could only give me a doting smile. Rachel also heard our conversation and frowned at Leo. Are you free? Don't bother her, go cut some fruit for her. Okay. Upon hearing this, Leo immediately sat by the window and started peeling an apple, looking all good-natured. Like a dog, really. I coldly withdrew my gaze, contemplating my next plan. Leo was easy to deal with, I knew everything about him. But Rachel. I looked at her and licked my lips. I always like to save the tastiest food for last. The biggest pillar for this woman was her company. That had to be destroyed. Just as I was thinking, the doctor left, and the maid had finished packing the bags. Rachel sat next to me, worried. How about staying another month? Eye replacement is a big deal, we should be careful. Hearing this, I almost laughed. Big deal? Then why did you act as if killing me wasn't a big deal? Really a wicked woman. But do you even know that your daughter's body is now mine? I secretly ground my teeth, then put on the usual haughty and annoyed expression Jesse often wore. Mom, the doctor said I could be discharged 2 weeks ago, why are you making me stay? It's so boring. Mom's just worried about you. Alright, don't say any more. I threw the apple Leo had handed me to the floor, ignoring his nearly twisted expression. Of course, no one would care about him, except for the previous me. Alright, I won't say it anymore, let's get discharged, don't be angry. Rachel coaxed me, speaking softly. Though usually tough and ruthless, she was all accommodating and loving towards Jessie, her daughter born at the age of 35. With her response, I stopped acknowledging her, stood up, and headed to the bathroom to change. Honestly, even though both Jessie and I had inherited Leo's good looks, I always looked disheveled with calloused and scarred hands, and a 1 centimeter long scar on my forehead. A scar left by Jessie hitting me with a phone. But Jessie? She looked like a wildcat, with smooth, fair skin and delicate fingers, clearly pampered and raised with love, definitely a goddess. Seeing this, I was even more unwilling. I walked up to the mirror, smiled, and put a small knife close to my face. Softly, I said, Jessie, are you still there? That face, it was the most important thing to Jessie. She hadn't gone out for a week. After a while, as I was about to drop the knife, my heart trembled slightly. I could feel a fear that wasn't mine. Then, Jessie's voice, both angry and scared, sounded in my mind. Lucy. You bitch, what did you do to me? She was crying. I laughed. In the past, it was always me who cried while she laughed. This reversal made me happy. So, does this mean she can see everything I do in my body? I chuckled. Better watch closely, Jessie. I threw the knife away, ignoring Jessie's furious yelling in my head, and followed Rachel and the others back to the villa. But soon, the police arrived. Leading the group was a detective around 30 years old, Simon. He looked like a nice guy. However, his eyes were sharp when he looked at me. The other cop, Jack, looked younger and more inexperienced. They came to investigate my cause of death. It's comforting to know that someone cared enough to doubt my death and seek justice for me. I thought with a sigh. Simon smiled and said, This must be Jessie, right? Are your eyes better after the surgery? I looked at him and nodded in response. Actually, I had thought about telling the police the truth, but everything was too bizarre. Besides, I didn't just want to send these two to jail, it would be too easy for them. Furthermore, Jessie was still inside my body. I wanted to take everything away from her and destroy it. Simon, don't you have anything better to do? I heard the murderer has been caught, so why are you still bothering us? Don't stress my daughter. Rachel looked at Simon and pulled me protectively behind her like a mother hen, clearly annoyed. Young Jack was about to step forward when Simon held him back and said, "We're just here to ask when Lucy's funeral is, as it's my case." I wanted to pay my respects. Funeral? Why bother for someone who died so tragically? It's bad luck, and besides, that's not my daughter. You should know, right? We had the crematorium throw her ashes away. Hearing this, I looked at Rachel unconsciously. My hands clenched into fists. What a beast. She killed me. She killed me. But then I glanced at Simon's probing eyes and looked away, lowering my gaze. I felt like he might have figured something out. Feeling a bit guilty, I said in a low voice, "I'm tired. My eyes hurt, I need rest." Rachel turned to me quickly, worried, then tersely told the two cops to leave. They had no choice but to go. I watched them leave through the crack in the door, then closed it completely and lay back on the bed. Jessie had quieted down. She had been sobbing and pleading with me all the way, giving me a headache. And I could feel that the more she fussed, the more this body felt out of my control. Who knows when I might be forced out? Thinking of that, my eyes turned cold. That can't happen. After a while, Rachel came in with a fruit platter, saying, "Here, have some fruit." Looking at the expensive fruit in the platter, I suddenly remembered middle school. Back then, cherries became popular online, and Rachel bought a lot for Jessie. I ate one and got slapped by Rachel, who dragged me by the hair. It hurt so much, it was humiliating and painful, my face burning. She called me a thief, a slut, shameless. Jessie watched from a distance, eating and laughing maliciously. I said it, Jessie was never kind enough to share fruit with me, no wonder. I looked at Leo, hoping he'd say something in my defense. He saw everything. But he didn't, silently sitting on the sofa, engrossed in his stocks. The next day at school, everyone knew I, the freeloader, had stolen my sister's fruit and been beaten for it. Some laughed ruthlessly, others looked at me with disdain. Since then, I never ate anything Jessie gave me again. Actually, I always wondered why Jessie hated me so much. I never did anything to harm her. She tilted her head, saying innocently, "Aren't you a toy?" I frowned. She continued, "Mom said you're just a toy she keeps. You don't even know how funny you look, so pitiful and pathetic." She broke the head off a figurine on the table and threw it at my feet, saying gently, "Like this, no one will help you." I looked at her, cold as ice. Then she screamed, alerting Rachel. She ran into Rachel's arms, crying that I bullied her and broke her figurine. All noise, no rain. As a result, I was beaten and locked in the basement for a whole day. Leo didn't even show up. At that moment, I realized the stark differences between people in this world. Some people are just helpless, cut to pieces without a fight. But why? I refused to believe or accept what Jessie said. "Jessie? What's wrong?" Rachel's voice pulled me from my memories. I smiled and shook my head, then skewered a grape and put it in my mouth. Thin-skinned, seedless, juice exploding in my mouth, sweet fragrance filling my mouth. Meanwhile, Jessie woke up again, crying out for her mom in my head, "Mom, save me." The desperation in her voice was both annoying and oddly satisfying. I couldn't help but smile, not noticing Rachel's frown. "Why do you suddenly seem a bit like that little bitch?" Her words made me freeze. Jessie perked right up, shouting inside, "Mom, she's a fake. She's a fake." Too bad Rachel couldn't hear her. I tilted my head and smiled gently. "Really?" I had a wicked sense of humor. She was stunned for a moment, then she patted her own head. I've been confused. Maybe because you've been lying down a lot this past month. You've lost weight and seem dazed. Here, take this card and go out more often to refresh your mind. These words plunged Jessie back into despair, and she went quiet. I just silently stabbed a cherry with my fork until the red juice oozed out and dripped onto the plate. Only then did I put it in my mouth. No, I want to work at your company. She looked puzzled. Why do you suddenly want to work at the company? Didn't you find it a hassle before? This accident and my blindness made me think a lot. I feel like I wasn't filial before. I want to help you out, so you won't be so tired. Plus, I want to become a strong person like you. I looked at Rachel with a lost expression. Sure enough, she was deeply moved and hugged me. Good girl, you've grown up and care for your mom. You can work at the company, but don't force yourself too much. Tell me if there's anything. I nodded in her arms, a smile spreading across my face. I didn't know if my plan would go smoothly, but I was really looking forward to seeing her reaction when she found out my true identity. Jessie began to realize she couldn't take back control of her body and started to soften up. But I still ignored her. She was on the verge of madness, sometimes even screaming inexplicably. But I wanted to drive her insane. I wanted her to watch as I destroyed everything she had, to witness all the ugliness and filth I had seen. The next day, when Leo found out I was going to work at the company, he couldn't hide his expression. All these years, he had tried so hard but couldn't share in this cake. He had to live off Rachel's leftovers, like a dog, even selling his own daughter. But even so, he was still just a dog. Rachel wasn't a fool. She might have liked Leo's looks and the emotional value he provided when she was younger, but she knew he was with her for her money. So she kept a firm grip on the money and the company and signed a prenuptial agreement initially. Leo could still hope to outlive Rachel, considering she was 10 years older than him. But if the company ended up in my hands, he would lose all hope of rising again. It would change from being Rachel's dog to Jessie's dog. So he watched as I busied myself preparing company documents, tried to strike up conversations, hoping I'd give him a position. But I would never give him a position. I wished I could chew him to the bone. He was an accomplice, a murderer. Despite being my biological father, he silently condoned everything to keep his wealth. But I could use him, have him and Rachel tear each other apart, and then destroy Jessie's biggest support. Starting with Leo's mistress. I looked at the things sent by the private investigator and smiled. Leo thought he had hidden it well over the years, but in reality, Rachel didn't care because she had several men outside too. As for Jessie, she looked down on Leo because of Rachel's teaching. She paid him no attention, giving him the peace to keep his mistress. But he couldn't fool me, who had been watching him closely. It was time to pay up. Considerate interest for selling me out. I looked at the computer, packed all the information, and anonymously sent it to Rachel's work email. Jessie was horrified watching me. Dad cheated? No, why did you send the evidence to Mom? What are you planning? I shrugged, looked at the mirror. Take a guess. Soon after, Rachel's office door was kicked open. She had a dominant personality and couldn't stand being cheated on. Her face turned red as she rushed out. I smirked, then stepped forward with a worried look. Mom, what's wrong? She gritted her teeth and looked around at the employees. Without saying a word, she pulled me away. We got to the parking garage, where she showed me the information. Your dad, that bastard, dares to cheat on me. I looked at the photos, showing the perfect mix of surprise and disgust. Yeah, Mom, you've been so good to him, and he still does this. It's disgusting. Hearing my words, Rachel got even angrier, a vicious look in her eyes. I tolerated him because he behaved well. But to play this trick on me? I'll make him suffer. She turned to me. See? Such men are only for playing around with. Don't make the same mistake as me. Luckily, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement back then. I nodded. Rachel didn't say anything more and drove off. I watched her worriedly until her car drove away, then retracted my gaze and emotionlessly messaged Leo. Mom knows you cheated. Be careful. He replied with a question mark. I quickly deleted the message, leaving no evidence. Then Jesse's irritating voice rang in my head. That's your real dad. Why do this to him? What's the benefit? As expected, Mom was right. You're a little bitch who should never have been raised. Raising a dog would be better than raising you. Her emotional outburst made my hand clench into a fist. No, it was her hand clenching, not under my control. I frowned and put my hand back in my pocket. Fortunately, Jessie didn't notice. After yelling, she started crying again. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't know how Rachel would deal with Leo, but watching them tear each other apart would be interesting. Leaving the parking garage, I stood at the big entrance and looked up at the towering building. This company was Jessie's biggest reliance. It had to be destroyed. And I wanted to see Rachel's face when her beloved daughter betrayed her. I looked away coldly. Then I got a call from the funeral home. I frowned and finally sighed, calling a cab. The driver asked where I was headed. Funeral home, I replied. After all, after being dead so long, I didn't want to be randomly disposed of. Even if I could never find peace. I watched the passing scenery and thought. At the funeral home, the staff confirmed my identity and gave me the things directly after thanking them. I stood on the street with the urn, looking at the blue sky and white clouds, feeling a little lost. I had turned into this small urn of ashes. I opened the lid, not expecting to find the peace lock that my mom gave me before she died. I had no idea when it broke. I picked it up, staring at it blankly. In my memory, Mom was just a name, no image at all. But this peace lock had been with me for 23 years. From this moment on, I'll be entirely gone. But really, I don't care much for Jessie's body. I want my own. And Jessie, talking to herself for so long in my body, was gradually losing her mind, even becoming problematic. Seeing my ashes now, she seemed to find an outlet and laughed sharply. So pathetic, dying without anyone to collect even your ashes, and just having some pieces of low-quality jade as your belongings. If I were you, I'd be grateful. It's just a pair of eyes. You'll get a new pair and have surgery. So stingy. I nodded, yeah, unlike some people, being in control of my body yet still complaining. You. She was exasperated but didn't speak again. I took a deep breath, held the jar, and walked to the bridge across from the funeral home. I grabbed a handful and scattered it out. The ashes fell into the river, disappearing. Watching the turbulent stream, I thought, no one would come to memorialize me anyway. Floating in the river and traveling around the world was better than ending up in a landfill, right? At least, it felt free. I pulled at the corners of my mouth. Unexpectedly, I turned my head and saw Simon. He watched what I did, frowning deeply. Though she wasn't his real sister, he thought I was being too ruthless. I looked at him coldly. Even if we bought a grave, no one would come to remember her. No one remembers her. He was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, without any more evidence, the case will be closed soon. Lucy was indeed killed by the criminals. I said nothing. He added, the evidence chain is strong, and there's surveillance footage. Do you have any other explanations? I knew he was suspicious too. But unfortunately, I had no evidence. None at all. He looked at me complexly and finally said, you're not quite like the personality shown in the records, before turning and leaving. Gotta admit, this guy was sharp. I lowered my head, took out all the broken pieces of the peace lock, scattered the rest of the ashes, and threw the jar in the trash. Though I didn't know how he figured it out, it reminded me, if even a stranger could suspect, Rachel would definitely suspect sooner or later. I lifted my gaze, eyes full of hostility. Gotta move quickly. Back at the villa, Leo saw me and immediately got up from the couch. He dragged me into the kitchen, pleading, Jessie, what should I do? Your mom canceled all my cards, and I just racked up some debt. I looked at him expressionlessly. Why didn't you go pick up the ashes? Leo looked baffled and then fawned, I've always pampered you the most. Lucy was ungrateful, wouldn't even donate her corneas for you. Why would I care about her? The funeral home would handle it anyway. I silently listened, watching him. This man had lost the handsomeness he had when young. Even though he worked out hard and looked much younger than his peers, his essence was worn down. He was pitiful and weak. So, I used to wish I could get fatherly love from such a useless man. How ridiculous. He couldn't even live like a decent human being. Jesse? He called out to me again. I took back my gaze and withdrew my hand, looking disgusted. I can't help it either. Who told you to mess around outside? Anger flashed briefly in Leo's eyes, but he still pleaded humbly, Sweetie, you must help Dad. Dad did a lot for your eyes. What else did this scumbag do? I looked at him. Seeing my raised eyebrow, he thought I was interested and eagerly added, I thought of this method. Even the doctor was a friend of mine. If I hadn't persuaded Lucy to get a checkup, your mom couldn't have made arrangements. You should thank Dad properly. Listening to these grating words, I rubbed the broken pieces of the peace lock in my pocket, my head down. And Jessie, hearing these words, was very happy. Lucy, you're so pitiful, she mocked. My fingers stung, and my palm felt sticky. I frowned. Jessie's strength was growing, and my right arm was becoming hard to control. This strong reaction was also obvious to Jessie. She laughed sharply. Lucy, you won't last long. You've lost. You've lost. Even if you have my body, so what? You'll still achieve nothing. Idiot, I'll take your eyes and lead a beautiful life, living happily. And you don't even have a grave. No one cares about you even in death. Really? I said coldly. Leo thought I was talking to him and immediately felt more confident. Of course. Dad has always loved you the most. I looked up at him, then smiled, taking out my phone and transferring $200,000 to him, saying, this month's pocket money, that's all, you use it first. He frowned, looking unsatisfied. Obviously, it wasn't enough. Your mom gives you way more than this every month. Hearing this, I turned cold, take it or leave it. Seeing this, he had to thank me. I knew he probably wouldn't repay this money, using it instead for gambling. Those guys had their eyes on him like a fat sheep. 10 gambles, 9 cheats, he'd lose everything soon, and even more. Of course, this bit of money couldn't hurt Rachel at all. As long as she divorced, it was fine. So, before leaving, I added, I'm going to work on the bid for K Group, don't gamble anymore. But hearing this, his eyes lit up. K Group? Winning that bid means billions, right? Seeing he took the bait, I nodded, yeah, many companies are vying for it, especially Blue Sky, very aggressive, probing our info everywhere. Mom invested a lot in this project. If we don't win, the company's cash flow will break. Hearing this, Leo looked thoughtful. But I ignored him and just went upstairs. I believed this would plant a seed in his heart. That's enough. I just need to wait till Rachel pushes him to the edge. Jessie finally realized what I was doing, incredulously. You're really going to do that? The company will go bankrupt. I smiled, this is just the beginning. It's not over yet. Then, I pressed hard on my chest. Within moments, she disappeared. This was the new way I found to quiet her, but I couldn't stop her from slowly waking up. Time was running out. Rachel moved quickly. Less than a day later, explicit photos of the model Leo was keeping spread everywhere, utterly ruining her reputation. Meanwhile, Leo was getting chased daily by debt collectors. He had no choice but to borrow from me. I lent him money a few times, and he managed to catch a break. But soon after, Rachel started bringing men home, guys younger and better looking than him. He couldn't take it, went up to argue, and got beaten up by the man Rachel brought home. Rachel just stood there, watching coldly with a sneer on her face. Leo looked at me. I was sitting on the couch, looking at my new manicure, not saying a word. He could only swallow his anger. But his patience didn't help him at all. Rachel got tired of his pathetic look and handed over the divorce papers, telling him to leave with nothing. He got so mad he almost flipped the table. "Rachel. You're gonna treat me like this? I just had one affair, how many have you had?" Rachel sneered, "You eat my food, drink my drinks. Letting you go with nothing is already kind. If Jessie wasn't your daughter, I'd make you owe me money. Don't be so ungrateful." When they said all this, they didn't hide it from me. I sat there, expressionless, watching Leo's angry face, my toes curling in excitement inside my shoes. Too bad, Leo gave in. He knelt at Rachel's feet, crying, saying he shouldn't have been blinded by lust. Then he grabbed at my pants, begging me to speak on his behalf. I thought about it and said, "Mom, Dad still owes a lot of gambling debts. If you don't help him pay them off and just divorce him, he'll get caught and sold." Rachel got even angrier after hearing that, kicked Leo, and told him to get lost. He deserves it. How many gambling debts have I paid off for him over the years? Get out now. Leo kept begging but was still dragged out by the butler. I watched their behavior but didn't miss the hatred in Leo's eyes. Rachel didn't care at all and said coldly, "See that? Never go for a man like your dad in the future. Useless, just a pretty face. Once he's old, he won't even have that. I must have been blind to be tricked by him. If I hadn't gotten pregnant with you, I wouldn't have married him." Listening to her constant belittling, I stood up to massage her shoulders and comfort her. I was in a great mood. Leo, now thrown out, wouldn't last long. Those debt collectors would wear him down. About half a month later, Leo came back. He looked haggard and much thinner, with injuries on his body. He cried to me about his hardships. He smelled bad, clearly having had a rough time. He was even missing a tooth. Between his words, he wanted to enter my room. I knew what he intended. After enjoying the sight of him kneeling and begging for a while, I agreed. Then I went to the kitchen to make tea. When I came back, he was gone. The drawers had been rummaged through. All my marked papers, hidden hair, everything was gone. The culprit was obvious. I opened the bid document. Sure enough, it was neatly folded, but I had deliberately messed with a few pages. I wondered how much Leo could sell that bid document for. Jessie gave up arguing with me and started to fight for physical control. Sometimes, my right hand wouldn't obey me and would even smash a cup during meetings. Rachel started questioning me more. I could only smile and make excuses. Luckily, she's been too busy lately to think much about me. The second week, the bidding began grandly. Rachel failed. Because Blue Sky's numbers were just a bit better than ours in every aspect. Such a situation is almost impossible. Unless they had our numbers in advance. Rachel was furious and checked everyone in the project team one by one, finally setting her sights on me. I must say, she's very competent at her job. But so what? Jessie had no motive. This kind of thing brought no benefit to her. And Jessie was Rachel's beloved daughter. So, I hesitantly talked about the day Leo came to see me, crying my heart out. But this was a big deal, and despite her fondness for Jessie, Rachel was furious and walked away. After investigation, it turned out Leo's gambling debts had been paid off. Now, who did it was obvious. A project worth billions was sold by Leo for just a few million. Rachel was near crazy with anger. But she's a tough one, too. Over the years, Rachel had limited Leo's gambling, keeping the amount small. But once Rachel was gone, she set a trap. Leo lost everything when he found out. He stormed into the villa, screaming to expose Lucy's secrets. But Rachel shut him up with one sentence. She said, "You arranged everything back then." I knew nothing. Leo's face twisted. He tried to approach but was thrown out, never to enter the villa area again. Not long after, Simon came over. Leo was dead, all his usable organs taken. He told me this, looking at me. I met his gaze expressionlessly, then calmly turned my eyes to Rachel. No one can stop me. That ending was Leo's own fault. I just gave a little push. At the same time, Rachel grew suspicious of me. I couldn't mimic Jessie's arrogance, couldn't show her innate confidence, or categorize everyone into tiers like she did. Moreover, too many things had happened at home since I got discharged, too many unexpected events. Rachel began to scrutinize me. She even plucked my hair while I slept. I knew all of this. But it didn't matter. Even if she figured it out, she couldn't do anything. Over the past 6 months, I've gathered enough evidence at the company. Her mistakes, her early crimes, are all in my file. The wrongs suffered with no justice, the grievances that couldn't be voiced. I'll bring them all to light. After the bid failure, Rachel was in chaos. I didn't act. I was waiting. Her years of experience and connections weren't for nothing. With several maneuvers, she sold all properties and managed to keep the financial chain stable. But those favors and resources, many were one-time deals. She had run out of tricks. It only needed a little push to crush her completely. I looked at the computer and clicked send. All the gathered information and vulnerabilities were sent to the CEO of Blue Sky in a package. There was no way they would miss this chance to kick you while you're down. I breathed a sigh of relief. But the next second, my body suddenly moved on its own, running straight to Rachel's office, shouting, "Mom, help me. She's fake." At the same time, the office door was opened. Luckily, Rachel wasn't there. And in 2 minutes, I regained control of my body. Things were getting worse. Jessie was cursing me non-stop in my head, but I ignored her and kept pushing the situation. Within a few days, the company's negative news was rampant and couldn't be suppressed. The investment that Rachel had worked hard to get fell apart. In just 1 month, she lost everything. Decades of effort went up in smoke. Rachel sat at her workstation, looking like all her energy and spirit had been drained. She looked old, her hair mostly gray. All the competent people at the company left. Some even kicked her while she was down. But despite this, Rachel still had some funds left. She gave most of it to me. Not wanting me to suffer, she decisively fled the country. Sitting on a smuggler's ship, she video called me, her face full of wrinkles, wearing a dirty cloak, sitting in the filthy and smelly cabin, scratching her head. She said she had no idea who was behind it all. The few old hands at the company who knew everything were either dealt with by her or were her loyal followers. She suspected and investigated everyone but found nothing. But she would come back. When she did, she would find out who did all this. As she said this, the malice in her eyes was apparent. I laughed. This was the second time I couldn't help but laugh in front of her. I said, "Rachel, take a good look at who I really am." She froze, looking puzzled. Then her face showed an expression of disbelief. I smirked and said, "Why pretend? Didn't you already suspect? You said you didn't take me because you didn't want me to suffer, but actually, you were afraid I'd betray you. That's why you didn't tell me the time and the ship number." "Lucy!" She screamed, her voice full of despair, shouting at the screen, "Where's Jessie? What did you do to Jessie?" I tilted my head, looking at the screen, and touched my heart, listening to Jessie's faint sobs, innocently saying, "She should be in a pitch-black place, almost dead. Lucy. You little bitch. Give me back my daughter." I scoffed, watching the man slowly approaching her on the screen, and hung up the phone. Rachel didn't tell me, so I had someone follow her and let that person relay a message when she boarded the ship. The woman had a lot of gold with her. On this kind of pirate ship, which was full of desperate outlaws, Rachel's fate was sealed unless she could swim back over the ocean. She was doomed. I smirked and donated all the money Jessie gave me to a welfare organization. And Jessie let out a fierce sob. Her proud family, her everything, it was all gone. The good news was, she was about to take back her body soon. Exciting, right? I looked in the mirror, using Jessie's body, and smiled. She kept cursing me in her head until she saw the knife in my hand and panicked. What are you doing?" I toyed with the short knife and gently said, "Giving your body back to you." She began to shrink back, crying, "You've already gotten your revenge. My parents are dead, we're out of money, I have nothing left, please don't do this. I looked at the reflection of the face, already covered in tears. It seemed my expressions were no longer under my control. Don't worry, I won't ruin your face. Jessie's sobbing quieted a bit, her voice choked. What are you going to do? I didn't answer, just raised my hand, using the last of my strength, and made a swift cut. At the very least, she should return what was mine. The world plunged into darkness. The next moment, I saw Jessie. She was screaming, rolling on the ground, clutching her eyes and crying in pain. Outside, the sound of an ambulance could be heard. And I turned back into a wandering soul, with a door behind me probably heading to hell, I thought, smirking, and walked towards the door. Finally, may Jessie have a long life.